The grand ballroom of the Chicago hotel buzzed with the self-important hum of the city's real estate titans. My
I
hand
told you I
rested
didn't do
on
it!
the
You
tight
have to
curve
believe me.
of my
Look at
belly.
me.
At
Get away
9
from
months
him.
pregnant,
I know what
this
you
baby
did.
felt like the only solid thing in a world of blueprints and broken promises. This was meant to be the pinnacle of our careers,
You can't just ignore me
Marcus's
like
and
this.
mine.
I'm
But
done
I
talking
wasn't
about
here
it. Let's
tonight
go.
to applaud him. I was here to demolish the meticulously designed lie our marriage had become. My grip tightened on the small printed-out page tucked into my clutch as I moved through the sea of tuxedos and evening gowns. Marcus, my visionary real estate mogul husband, thought I was at home, feet up. For a second, watching the city's most powerful people clink glasses of champagne, the scene felt utterly detached from reality. Then I heard his laugh, that deep, persuasive rumble I once found so comforting. It carried from the main stage, where he stood with the lead architect on his newest project, a woman whose name was now burned into my memory. Zara. My chest seized. I'd prayed the project files I'd found were some kind of misunderstanding, but she was devastatingly real. Zara Vance, the industry's new prodigy, whose meteoric rise Marcus had so personally sponsored. She was a symphony of sharp, modern elegance, standing beside a scale model of a skyscraper that I now understood with a gut-wrenching certainty. Marcus, looking masterful in a custom Brioni tuxedo, had a proprietary hand resting on her lower back. Beside the model was a small brass plaque. She embodied sleek ambition and creative fire, a painful contrast to the cumbersome, exhausted weight of my own form. A cold dread settled deep in my stomach. In my simple silk maternity gown, I suddenly felt like an uninvited guest. Marcus's eyes swept across the adoring crowd, a monarch reviewing his subjects. His gaze passed over me without a flicker of recognition, then snapped back, shock finally dawning in his eyes. His handsome features tightened into a scowl, a flash of raw irritation, as if my very presence was a catastrophic flaw in his evening's plan. Zara's attention followed his, her expression melting from adoration to a shrewd, territorial curiosity. I could practically hear the calculations clicking in her mind. Before my courage could desert me, I walked straight towards them, stopping before the skyscraper model. The project is called The Beacon, I stated, my voice low but sharp enough to slice through the surrounding chatter. How very inspiring. The practiced smile fell from Marcus's face, leaving behind a rigid mask of fury. Zara's perfectly composed smile faltered. I pulled the folded page from my clutch. It's strange. The dedication in the final proposal doesn't mention the firm. It just reads, "For my true foundation." My heart thudded against my ribs, a frantic rhythm against the sudden, rapt silence of the people closest to us. I felt a dozen pairs of eyes fix on me, the polite admiration of the attendees morphing into raw, hungry curiosity. I glanced from the architectural model to Zara, then back to my husband. Is this the legacy you've been building, Marcus? The words hung between us, an open declaration of war. His face became a mask of stone. My knees felt weak, but I held my ground. In that one moment, I knew the beautiful blueprint of our perfect marriage had been torn to shreds, its pieces scattered across the marble floor of this ballroom. Across the room, a man who had been chatting with a city official paused, his notepad forgotten, as his gaze locked onto our unfolding crisis. He was about to become an unforeseen element in a disaster I hadn't even started to process. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to spin, and the awards gala felt more like a courtroom. Marcus stood frozen, trying to project an air of weary amusement, as if my public accusation was just an unfortunate side effect of pregnancy hormones. But I saw the frantic pulse in his temple, the caged animal panic in his eyes, He cleared his throat. Eleanor, you're causing a disturbance. We can talk about this confusion when we get home. The audacity of him trying to manage me in front of this audience was breathtaking. Before I could respond, Zara stepped forward, her voice as smooth and cool as glass. Marcus, darling, who is this? She purred, her eyes wide with practiced innocence, framing me as some deranged party crasher. She seems quite distressed. Does she need a glass of water? The condescending pity in her voice was a clear attempt to invalidate me, to paint me as a hysterical woman. A surge of white-hot anger steadied my spine. I wanted to unleash a storm of words, to lay bare the quiet, devastating betrayal they had orchestrated. But Marcus spoke first, his voice a low, threatening hiss, meant only for me. You are completely misinterpreting the situation. I suggest you go home now, before you make an even bigger fool of yourself. The lie was so blatant, so absolute. My hand shook as I clutched the evidence. The memories came flooding back, each one a fresh cut. Me, 7 months pregnant, finding emails about late-night design sessions and shared vision. Me, at home alone, while he attended city planning dinners that were actually intimate project meetings. Me, watching him invest our future into gleaming towers of steel and glass, while the foundation of our own home crumbled into dust. He had been methodically erasing me from his world, one secret dedication at a time. I lifted my chin. I'm not misinterpreting anything, I said, my voice firm now, and loud enough for the widening circle of onlookers to hear. Especially your handwriting on this dedication. Marcus's jaw locked. He loathed being contradicted, especially in public. Zara laid a perfectly manicured hand on his arm. Marcus, please don't, she murmured, slipping effortlessly into the role of the poised professional under attack. This woman is clearly having some sort of episode. The words were a calculated strike, meant to label me as unstable. I turned, my eyes stinging, but tearless. I refused to give them the satisfaction. As I stepped back, the room suddenly swam before my eyes. My own body chose that moment to fail me. My knees gave way. From the crowd, someone moved with purpose. A steady voice cut through the murmurs. Whoa there, you shouldn't have to be on your feet for this. I turned my head. It was the man with the notepad, the architect. His face held no pity, just a quiet decency as he offered a strong arm to catch me. His simple act of kindness was about to alter the entire trajectory of the night in ways I couldn't have predicted. The man guided me toward an empty chair, his solid presence a small anchor in the wreckage of my life. He was the antithesis of Marcus. No flashy tuxedo, just a well-worn blazer, dark jeans, and sharp, intelligent eyes that didn't flinch from the ugly scene he had just witnessed. He produced a bottle of water from a nearby service table. Breathe for a second, he said, his voice calm. That entire performance was meant to make you feel like you were the crazy one. You're not. I looked up at him, a lump forming in my throat. Who are you? I managed to ask, my voice a ragged whisper. The man gave a small, wry smile. My name is Liam. I've competed against your husband for a few projects, and I couldn't help but overhear. I am so sorry you were put in that position. I took a shaky drink of water, struggling to pull myself together. In my world, people didn't intervene. They observed and gossiped later. But Liam was looking at me, not through me. From the stage, Marcus made a sharp sound of contempt. You have no place in this. Liam rose to his full height, facing Marcus, his calm composure a stark contrast to my husband's barely controlled fury. I know what I heard, he said simply. I heard a man publicly dismiss his pregnant wife in favor of his associate. It doesn't take a genius to figure it out. Zara let out a theatrical gasp, her professional poise finally cracking. This is an entirely private matter, she snapped, her voice losing its polished edge. Liam's expression was unreadable. It is, and a person's character tends to be a pretty crucial part of their professional reputation. The words hit their mark. Marcus's gaze darted around the room, finally registering the extent of the damage. Zara, we are leaving. Now. They beat a hasty retreat, not with dignity, but like vandals escaping the scene. As they disappeared through an exit, an immense wave of relief washed over me. I finally released the breath I had been holding. Thank you, I whispered to Liam. You absolutely did not have to do that. I'm aware, he said, his tone straightforward. But I've never been good at standing by while people with power try to crush someone who is telling the truth. His conviction resonated with a part of me I thought had vanished. Can I get you a ride? Liam asked. Or help you get home? I nodded, still feeling unsteady. A car would be amazing. As he took out his phone to order one, a new thought began to crystallize in my mind. Rival architects, who are known for their integrity, don't just happen to step in and play the hero at their competitor's award ceremony. I was suddenly sure that our paths crossing here, in this ballroom, at this specific time, was not just a fortunate coincidence. We were waiting near the coat check when the main doors to the ballroom swung open again. The angry, expensive sound of Marcus's bespoke shoes clicked against the marble. I didn't have to see his face. My stomach dropped. He was coming back. Liam registered the change in my expression and shifted his position, standing slightly in front of me as Marcus closed the distance. It wasn't an aggressive posture, just a quiet, physical message that a line had been drawn. Marcus's face was a mask of cold rage, his eyes locked on Liam as if he was the sole reason for his night's implosion. I want to know exactly what you think you are doing, he growled, his voice low and dangerous. Liam didn't flinch, just raised an eyebrow. At the moment, I'm waiting for a car to take your wife home. Did you have an alternative in mind? It looks to me, Marcus shot back, like you're an opportunist trying to capitalize on a private argument to score professional points. That's one theory, Liam replied, his voice deceptively calm. Another is that you're a fraud who just turned a private argument into a public humiliation. Zara was gone. It was just the three of us now. This has gone far enough, she snapped, her voice a little too loud. We were just going over the final lighting schematics for the model. That's all. The lie was paper thin. Her eyes bored into me, cold and analytical, as if she were assessing every fault line in my composure for a future attack. Marcus crossed his arms over his tailored suit jacket. Amelia, whatever you're trying to prove by dragging some foundation head into our private business, it's a new low, even for you. That was it. The last thread of my control frayed and broke. Marcus, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. In 5 minutes, this foundation head has shown more concern for our son than you have in 9 months. His expression became a frigid, dismissive wall. Isabel slinked to his side, her voice oozing with false sympathy. Amelia, darling, you need to calm down. All of this stress can't be good for the baby. Given your condition. Elias took a sharp breath, a sound that sliced right through the mounting tension. That's enough. The entire energy of the rooftop lounge shifted. He hadn't raised his voice, but his words landed with the weight of concrete, a solid barrier against which their petty cruelties crumbled. The two of you will leave her alone now, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. She is obviously distressed. Do not try to frame her as irrational. Marcus opened his mouth to argue, then paused. A flicker of something new crossed his features. Was it just shock? Or was it the sudden, unnerving realization that he was facing a power he hadn't anticipated? I couldn't be sure, but the way he stared at Elias was the first time his bulletproof confidence had cracked all night. Isabel tugged on his arm. on his discretion. Just leave it, Marcus. She's only embarrassing herself. As they started to turn away, Marcus cast one last probing look at Elias, trying to place the man who clearly wasn't just another name on his guest list, a connection he couldn't quite identify. And in that moment, the first hairline crack appeared in the flawless, glittering empire they had built. The second Marcus and Isabel were out of earshot, Elias silently held out a bottle of water to me. It was one of those sleek, minimalist glass bottles of ridiculously overpriced Norwegian spring water, the kind that costs $20 and is standard issue in Manhattan executive suites. My hands trembled as I took it, but my gaze was locked on the elevator doors my husband had just disappeared through. "What did I do?" I whispered, to make his new skyscraper more important than his own family. The words were like swallowing glass. I clutched my stomach protectively. "You did nothing to deserve this." My lower lip started to quiver. I glanced up at this man, with the kind eyes, my face a mess of disbelief, screaming that he couldn't possibly know. Elias leaned in slightly, his voice both soft and unyielding. "Pay attention to me," he said. "The choices made by a man blinded by his own ambition are never, ever a measure of your own worth." Before I could process what he'd said, a new wave of whispers rippled through the gallery. Everyone was looking toward the giant projection screen on the main wall, murmuring and then shooting horrified glances our way. My stomach dropped. Isabel was standing near the presentation laptop, her phone discreetly pointed at it, pulling the strings. The screen, which was supposed to be displaying the architectural renderings of the tower, was now a slideshow, a series of sun-drenched, intimate photos of her and Marcus on a trip to the Hamptons. I was told was a solo business retreat. "It's a real tragedy," she commented to a journalist nearby, her voice pitched perfectly to be overheard. "The pressure of fatherhood is just too much for some men. It's obvious he's had to find comfort somewhere else." The room fell silent. 200 eyes were on me, filled with a sick mix of pity and fascination. My heart hammered against my ribs. That's a lie. He's lying about all of it. The words were a strangled sound in my throat. Isabel let out a theatrical sigh. "Amelia, my dear, if you're struggling to control your emotions, you should know there are people who can help with that." Elias moved forward, his calm demeanor replaced by an imposing stillness, as solid as the building's foundation. "Turn it off," Isabel feigned ignorance. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Elias said again, his voice dangerously low. "Take down those pictures. Now." Marcus stalked back towards us, his face flushed with anger. "Who in the hell do you think you are? You don't come into my event and start making demands." Elias's expression was unreadable. "You are actively engineering the public humiliation of your pregnant wife. I imagine your investors on the board of the Thorn Group would find that very interesting." He then locked eyes with Marcus, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Or perhaps I should just call the city planning commissioner. I'm sure she's very particular about the moral character of the developers she partners with." For the first time, stark terror flashed across Marcus's face. "How do you know who my investors are?" he sputtered. Elias ignored him. His gaze cut right through Isabel's smugness. "You have 5 seconds." Her smirk finally vanished. Several guests were now holding up their phones, recording the escalating drama. The murmuring grew louder. Finally, caving under the weight of it all, Isabel lowered her phone and hissed, "Fine," signaling a technician to kill the slideshow. But Elias wasn't done. Marcus was frantically trying to get the attention of the event coordinator, who was already rushing over with a look of pure panic. "Get this man out of here. Get him out of my launch party, now." But he was too late. Isabel froze, with a champagne flute halfway to her lips. My own face was numb with shock. In a heartbeat, the glamorous party, meant to celebrate Marcus's triumph, had become the venue for his spectacular downfall, and the consequences were immediate. The coordinator was speaking into his wrist mic, his eyes flitting between the blank screen, me, Marcus, and the woman who was so clearly his mistress. He gestured to a security guard in a sharp suit who was already making his way toward them. Please, have them escorted from the premises. Marcus stopped in his tracks, every bit of color drained from Isabel's face. And just like that, the public disgrace they had so meticulously planned for me was redirected back at them, 10 times stronger. The guard arrived, his demeanor professional as he took in the situation. "Is everything all right here, Mr. Thorne?" he asked, his tone implying he knew it wasn't. Elias stated the facts with perfect composure. This woman was deliberately broadcasting private photographs to publicly humiliate Mr. Thorne's wife. We have about 200 witnesses, including members of the press. The guard's expression settled into a professional, unreadable mask. "Sir, ma'am, I am going to have to ask you to leave the event." Isabel's jaw went slack. "You can't be serious. She's the one having a breakdown." Marcus grabbed her arm, his grip like a vice. "Isabel, shut up." But she was furious. She turned to the rapt audience. "This is a complete overreaction. I was just sharing a happy memory." Elias's calm voice sliced through her frantic performance. "There is a significant difference between malice and memory." Marcus let out a shaky breath. "Let's just go." But as they turned to walk away, I felt a small but insistent kick from inside me, a tiny pulse of life. My hand went to my belly. "No, my sweet boy, none of this is your fault." And in that instant, something inside of me didn't just break. It was forged anew into something harder, something that would never, ever shrink for him again. For years, I had made myself smaller to fit into the grand design of his life. I had walked on eggshells around the moods of the man who was supposed to be my partner. I had carried the burden of his emotional unavailability as if it were my own failure. But feeling my son move as his father walked out the door with another woman, that was the spark that reignited a strength I thought was long extinguished. I pulled my shoulders back. "Actually," I said, my voice clear and steady in the sudden silence, loud enough for Marcus to hear without question, "you owe your son an answer." He froze, his back still to me. Isabel whipped around. "What did you just say to him?" Elias stood beside me, a quiet, solid presence, as if he understood that this was a battle I had to fight myself. I lifted my chin. "This is your son, Marcus. He can't see what you've done tonight, but I can. And the very least you owe him is to acknowledge the family you're abandoning." A collective gasp rippled through the remaining crowd. Marcus's face was ashen. "Not here, Amelia. This is not the time or place." "And why is that?" I shot back. "Because you don't have the luxury of our apartment to gaslight me into believing I'm insane, because you actually have to be accountable in front of an audience?" For a long, torturous moment, the entire room was dead silent. Then, in a final, monumental act of cowardice, Marcus turned his back on me and on our unborn child, and let Isabel lead him away through the revolving glass doors. The second the doors stopped spinning, the tension in the room snapped. Elias put a gentle hand on my arm. That took incredible strength. But I didn't feel strong. I felt like I was standing at the epicenter of a massive collapse, realizing this wasn't just a fight, but the demolition event that was bringing my entire world down. The silence they left in their wake was deafening. I held my stomach, my breath catching in my throat. I tried to find my center, to focus on the life I was carrying. Elias gave me a respectful moment before he spoke. "Are you going to be okay?" His voice was quiet, but it had a sturdy, dependable quality, like a man who was used to building things that last. I managed a weak nod, even as the ruins of my life lay shattered all around me. I will be. He paused, then moved to a quiet service station that had been set up for the VIPs and returned with a bottle of chilled water. Here, he offered, holding it out to me. You look like you could use this. I accepted it, my fingers brushing against his. Thank you, I breathed. Liam gave a small, steady smile. Of course. I was struck by the quiet strength in his demeanor. His eyes held no pity, only a deep, unwavering respect. A small spark of warmth managed to cut through the icy dread that had settled in my bones. I think I need to get out of here, I murmured, suddenly aware that we were the center of 100 whispering conversations. Liam shook his head slightly. You have nothing to be ashamed of. He does. But he took a step back, giving me the room I needed as I made my way toward the lobby to get my coat. As the attendant brought my cashmere wrap, he leaned in and whispered, That gentleman who helped you, he nodded toward Liam. That's Liam Knight, the architect. He designed this entire tower. I could only manage a faint smile, not daring to look in his direction. Outside, the sharp Chicago air was a bracing shock. I pulled the wrap tighter, a reflex to shield my unborn child from the cold. My heart felt like it had been shattered into a million tiny pieces, the blueprint for my future completely torn apart. Just then, Liam emerged from the revolving doors behind me. Alara. I turned, stunned that he had followed me. I don't think I ever told you my name. Look, he said, trying to find the right words. I wasn't going to get involved, but what he did up there was just indefensible. And if you ever need help drawing up a new blueprint for your life, I would be honored to help. His offer was so startling it took my breath away. People didn't just do that, not for a stranger. Why? I asked, my voice barely audible. He gave a simple shrug, a small gesture that seemed filled with conviction. Because my entire life is about creating strong, beautiful things from a solid foundation. I believe people deserve that same chance. A clear honesty shone in his eyes. Before I could respond, my car service arrived at the curb. Mommy, can Mr. Knight walk with us? It's really big and dark down there. Liam's expression softened. I would be happy to. As the three of us descended into the vast, silent underground parking structure, a strange sense of calm began to settle over me. It felt as though this kind man was already becoming a steadying force in our story. The garage was mostly empty, the hum of the overhead lights echoing in the cold, concrete space. My older model Range Rover was parked beneath one of those humming lights, looking like a forgotten relic among the newer, more exotic cars. I hit the unlock button, and Theo climbed into his car seat, clutching a small architectural model of the tower. Like a precious treasure he wasn't sure he was allowed to have. I just stood there for a moment, watching my breath cloud in the chilly air, my hands trembling. Every single nerve in my body felt raw and exposed. A nauseating blend of humiliation, searing anger, and a grief so profound I couldn't yet comprehend it was raging inside me. Liam stopped a few feet away, respecting my space, but his quiet presence was like an anchor in the hurricane of my emotions. You don't seem all right, he observed gently. I'm fine, I lied, the word tasting like poison. No, you're not. His words were not an accusation. They were a simple statement of fact. Hearing that truth said out loud was the final blow to my crumbling composure. My vision blurred. I pressed my hand hard against my lips, trying to suppress the sob that was clawing its way up from my soul. But it was useless. The sound ripped out of me, a broken, wounded cry in the stillness of the garage. I just can't understand it. How a man can just delete his own unborn child from the blueprints of his own future, pretending this pregnancy doesn't even exist. Liam let out a long, heavy sigh that seemed to hold a world of unspoken sorrow. Some people find it easier to demolish a wing of the house than to learn how to live with the choices they've made. A lump formed in my throat. But this baby isn't a design flaw. Of course not, he agreed, his voice instantly soft. Anyone with a heart can see this is a gift. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes. All I wanted was one peaceful evening, just one single, normal gala, to celebrate my husband's greatest achievement. You still deserve that, he said softly. You are allowed to have more moments of peace than moments of chaos. The kindness in his voice was a strange, warm pressure building in my chest. A feeling so unfamiliar, it almost felt like hope. When I finally dropped my hands, his eyes held no trace of pity, only a deep and startling understanding. You have a stronger foundation than you realize, Alara. Tonight proved that. My breath caught in my throat. I don't feel strong. You don't have to, he replied. You just have to keep standing. But there was something in his tone that was less like a cliché and more like a promise. And I was suddenly hit with the dizzying feeling that our lives were now linked in a way that went far beyond this chance encounter. I wiped at my eyes with my sleeve, taking in a shaky breath. Theo was safely strapped in, lost in a game on a tablet, looking so small against the backdrop of the glittering Chicago skyline. Liam stood next to my car, his hands in his pockets. If you don't mind, he began, his voice low. I'll wait right here until you've driven out of the garage, just to make sure you're both all right. I managed a small, grateful nod. Thank you. You've been unbelievably kind. But before I could turn the key, the quiet whine of a powerful engine filled the garage. A black Bentley Continental swept around the concrete pillar and stopped abruptly behind me, boxing me in. My stomach dropped. Arthur. He exited the car so fast the heavy door swung closed on its own. His face was a rigid mask of cold fury. The charming public image had vanished, replaced by someone calculating and cruel. Alara. His voice was a low threat. We are not done here. Liam moved with a fluid grace, placing himself like a calm barrier between Arthur and me. I think it's time for you to leave, Mr. Sterling. Arthur's gaze was locked on me. He gestured dismissively. You had no right to cause an incident in front of my investors. Do you have any idea how your little scene reflects on me? I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. The reflection you value more than your own son? His jaw tightened. That is not what this is about, and you know it. I'm not the one who premiered a work of fiction to 500 people. But Arthur's rage had now found a new target. His glare shifted to Liam, burning with a fresh, possessive anger. And just who are you? Arthur sneered. The architect, coming to the rescue? Liam's posture remained unchanged. That's not your concern. Arthur took a menacing step forward, his voice dripping with contempt. You think you can just insert yourself into my private affairs? Liam didn't so much as flinch, but the air around them crackled with tension. Your private affairs. You're the one who projected them onto a 30-foot screen for the whole city to see. Don't try to rewrite the script now just because you don't like how it was received. Arthur's face darkened. If you say one more word, I swear I will. Liam cut him off, his voice dangerously level. You'll what? Have my projects canceled? That seems to be your preferred method for handling inconvenient truths. The silence that followed was thick and absolute. Arthur looked like a man about to detonate, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. I could see Theo's small face peering at us from the car. Stop, I said, my voice sharp and loud. Arthur, just go. His furious gaze shot from me to Liam, and then to the car, where my hand was instinctively covering my stomach. For just a moment, something other than rage flickered in his eyes. It was fear, not of Liam, but of the perfect world he'd built for himself completely shattering. He relented. "This isn't over," he bit out. He got back in his Bentley and sped off, the tires emitting a faint, angry squeal on the polished concrete. Only when his taillights vanished did Liam seem to relax. He looked back at me, his voice quiet again. "I have a feeling things are going to get much more difficult before they get easier." I swallowed hard against the lump in my throat, knowing he was right. This was just the first crack in the foundation of Arthur's perfectly constructed life. That night, long after Theo was asleep, I sat on the couch, listening to the city hum outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse. The rooms felt cavernous and empty, the quiet making the storm inside my head roar even louder. I couldn't stop replaying it all. The video, Arthur's cold, dismissive speech, Liam's steady presence cutting through the noise. Every single memory was a new wave of panic. My phone vibrated on the cushion next to me. The screen displayed no caller ID. My first instinct was to let it go, but a cold knot of certainty in my stomach told me I had to answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice thin and weak. There was a brief silence, then a voice I knew better than my own, clipped and controlled. "Ilara, it's Arthur." My blood ran cold. "What do you want?" He let out an impatient sigh, the sound of a CEO burdened by the incompetence of others. "We need to align on a narrative. I was out of line tonight." That might be the understatement of the year. "I was ambushed," he snapped, before catching himself. "Listen, we need to discuss the fallout." I squeezed my eyes shut. "You had 6 months to discuss this fallout." He drove right past the comment. "I'm coming over tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. No. The word was a stone, its weight surprising even me. "You don't get to design my life anymore. This isn't a negotiation, Clara." "Oh, yes," I replied, my voice perfectly steady. "It is." A beat of silence hung on the line. Then, Alistair's voice morphed, taking on a smooth, patronizing tone that always set my teeth on edge. "Genevieve believes it would be more advantageous for the IPO if we can manage this personal matter with quiet dignity." And there it was, the cold, unvarnished truth. "For the initial public offering," I echoed, a strange coldness seeping into my bones. "Not for our baby." His failure to deny it was louder than any confession. I disconnected the call before another word could poison the air. A sickening knot of fury and sorrow tightened in my gut. Alistair didn't want a family. He wanted to neutralize a liability. And Genevieve was his legal counsel on the matter. I covered my face with my hands, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. A gentle but insistent knock on my front door startled me so badly I nearly jumped out of my skin. When the doorbell rang again, I found Elias on my stoop, holding a small paper bag from that old-world bakery over on Charles Street. "I had a feeling you might have forgotten about lunch," he said, more as a statement than a question. I just stared at him, confused. "How could you possibly know?" "You have the look of someone trying to hold up the sky by yourself," he said, interrupting gently. I was inspecting a facade just down the block. It was a flimsy excuse, a kind lie that felt like a warm, comforting coat. He stepped inside, setting the bag on the marble countertop in my kitchen. "Are you all right?" I just shook my head, letting go of any attempt to pretend I was okay. Elias didn't offer a hug or any cheap reassurances. He simply waited, his presence a silent, steadying force in the room. And in that historic Beacon Hill brownstone, with the winter light filtering through the wavy glass and my world falling apart, I felt a sense of stability I hadn't felt in years. Grounded. But I was about to learn that being grounded just means you have a longer way to fall. The next morning arrived with a cold, unforgiving drizzle that slicked the cobblestone streets. My sleep had been a wreck, filled with disjointed nightmares, starring Alistair's face, a mask of calculated ambition. His words echoed in my mind. It's for the good of the company. As if our unborn child was just a line item on a balance sheet. I was pouring myself some juice when a hard, commanding knock rattled the front door. My heart plummeted. He shouldn't be here, I whispered, wrapping my arms instinctively around my belly. The knock sounded again, more demanding this time. Clara, I know you're in there. We need to talk. I took a shaky breath and opened the door just a crack, enough to see him standing there. What do you want, Alistair? My voice was flat, empty of all warmth. He pushed the heavy door inward and strode into the foyer. We are going to handle this like rational adults. I held my ground, a human barrier preventing him from coming any further into my sanctuary. You can't just shove your way in here. It's about my daughter, he countered, his tone laced with a sharp impatience. Your daughter? I let out a short, bitter laugh. Is that her designation for today's agenda? Alistair scanned the Boston brownstone, his jaw clenched. Where is she? I didn't need to answer. Lily peeked around the corner from the library, her small face a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Daddy. Alistair's entire posture changed, a forced, polished smile appearing on his face. Hi there, sweet pea. Lily stayed half hidden by the doorway. Why are you here? Alistair's smile tightened at the edges. I came to see you, of course. For the article? Lily asked with the piercing clarity only a 6-year-old possesses. A chill went down my spine. Alistair's face hardened. What? Lily looked down at her sparkly sneakers. I heard you on your video call with that lady, the one who tells you how to sound like a dad on TV. You said you needed new pictures for the people giving you money. Alistair's head whipped toward me, his eyes blazing with a potent mix of rage and utter humiliation. Did you feed her that line? Before I could even formulate a reply, a quiet voice spoke from the still open doorway. She didn't have to. You've been rehearsing it loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. Alistair spun around. Elias stood there, poised and calm, his hands tucked into the pockets of his tweed coat. I felt my breath catch. Elias. He walked in without an invitation, coming to a stop a few feet away from me. It wasn't a gesture of ownership, but an unmistakable declaration of allegiance. Alistair's face grew blotchy with anger. What the hell do you think you're doing here? Did she call her pet historian? For backup? Not at all, Elias said, his voice level. But when a developer starts shouting at an intercom on a quiet, historic street, people take notice. Alistair's voice shook with indignation. This is a private matter. You are nothing to her. Elias's composure was unshakable, and yet I seemed to be the one she trusts. Something in Alistair's facade cracked. You need to get out of my house. You have no clue who you're dealing with. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Elias cut in, his voice acquiring a steely resolve. Alistair Finch, head of Finch Global Properties. I also know that your new Seaport Legacy Tower is under a quiet review by the state's archaeological board for failure to report a significant historical find during excavation. Alistair just stood there, his mouth hanging slightly open. How did you know? Elias took one slow, measured step toward him, his voice dropping to a low, menacing pitch. You ought to be very, very careful whose history you try to pave over. Alistair went pale, and in that instant it became terrifyingly clear that Elias Vance was much more than the charming preservationist I'd been having coffee with. Alistair stared at Elias, the developer's bravado dissolving into a brittle, sputtering anger. You think you can scare me by naming my own company? Elias's expression remained perfectly neutral. Number 1. I find the truth is often scary enough on its own. A hairline fracture appeared in Alistair's confidence, but it was enough for me to see the raw panic underneath. I finally found my own voice again, stepping forward to stand beside Elias. You need to go, Alistair. Whatever this display is for, I said, gesturing between the three of us. It's frightening, Lily. Alistair sneered. Oh, of course. And I suppose this academic relic is your new expert on parenting? Before I could respond, Lily's small voice pierced the tense air. Mommy, his voice sounds like a building falling down. My heart shattered. Elias shifted his stance slightly, placing himself more squarely in Alistair's path. He's done making noise, he said, his voice calm but absolute. Alistair's eyes narrowed into slits. You have no authority here. Elias offered a tiny, almost dismissive shrug. Then prove me wrong. Turn around, walk out that door, and be quiet. A heavy, toxic silence filled the room. Alistair glanced around the historic home he had once promised to cherish, and then systematically neglected. His eyes fell on our daughter, who had his sharp mind, but none of his artifice. And then to me, the wife he had assumed would be too fragile to ever fight back. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't filled with remorse, but with the sting of a deeply insulted ego. I owe neither of you anything. I am here to tell you that my legal counsel is preparing to file for full custody, with or without your consent. A sickening wave of fear washed over me. Not like this. Not when it was never about her. You have no grounds to stand on, Alistair spat. But your new lead counsel does, is that it? I shot back. Was it Genevieve's brilliant strategy to use a custody hearing to bolster your family man credentials for the IPO? He recoiled, as if physically struck. I pressed on. This was never about being a father. This is about risk management for your shareholders. Tell me I'm wrong. The suffocating silence that followed was all the answer I needed. Elias exhaled slowly. Alistair, if you drag this into a courtroom, you will be inviting a degree of public scrutiny that your investors will find distasteful. What kind of scrutiny? Alistair snapped. Elias's expression changed, the scholarly calm replaced by something unyielding and absolute. The kind that reopens investigations into every zoning variance you secured through backdoor deals. The kind that exposes the environmental impact reports you paid to have falsified. The kind of scrutiny the people on my preservation board are paid to perfect. Alistair swallowed hard, and for the first time, I saw raw fear in his eyes. It wasn't just panic. It was the abrupt, nauseating dawning that he was catastrophically outmatched, as though he was just now realizing the true influence of the man standing in our foyer. He stumbled back toward the entrance. This isn't finished, he managed to say, before turning and all but fleeing, the heavy door booming shut behind him. Elias looked at me with a pained expression, as if he regretted that his predictions had proven true. And in that ringing silence, I knew that Alistair wasn't the only powerful man in the room. After Alistair had gone, the atmosphere in the brownstone felt heavy and static, like the air after a storm. I braced myself against the kitchen island, pressing my fingertips to my temples, trying to will my heart to slow down. Across the room, Elias stood with his arms crossed, giving me the silence and space I needed to recompose myself. You were magnificent, he finally said, his voice gentler than I had ever heard it. I let out a weak, humorless laugh. Magnificent wasn't the word I would have used. A small, thoughtful smile touched his lips as he chose his next words carefully. Clara, he began, his tone shifting to serious. I hadn't intended to discuss this today, but after seeing that, I cannot simply watch as he attempts to demolish your life. I looked at him, my defenses immediately snapping back into place. What on earth are you talking about? Robert reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single, unmarked manila envelope. There was no law firm logo, just a small, embossed seal I'd never seen before, the Sterling Foundation. A cold knot of anxiety tightened in my gut. I thought you were a financial advisor, I said, my voice barely audible. I am, he confirmed. But that isn't the only hat I wear. My mind was reeling. You work for this foundation? Robert shook his head slightly. I chair the board. My grandfather started it almost a century ago. I just stared at him, unable to process this new information. The quiet, meticulous man I knew was Robert Sterling, the head of one of Chicago's most influential philanthropic organizations, using his family fortune to champion underdog causes. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Because I needed you to see the advisor, not the billionaire. I took a deep, unsteady breath, the disparate facts of my situation snapping together with a horrifying click. So, why are you telling me this now? Robert's expression was serious and direct. Because I'm offering you the Foundation's backing, the kind of backing that can shield you from Liam and give your unborn daughter the security she's entitled to. What kind of backing? I asked, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He slid the envelope across the table. Our entire litigation department. The Foundation's general counsel will connect you with the most ruthless divorce attorney in Chicago, and our board has authorized a fund to cover every last cent of the cost. I was completely stunned. Mr. Sterling, I couldn't accept that. This is not charity, Amelia, he said, his tone resolute. I have watched you build this company from nothing. You fight for small businesses that the big banks ignore. The Foundation was created to protect innovators like you from predators like him. My throat felt tight. And, he added, his voice dropping slightly, this gives you the power to countersue the second Liam tries to use his money to bury you. That was the genius of it. He wasn't just offering me a lifeline, he was handing me a weapon. Think about it, he said softly. Take your time. But as he left my office, I knew he had just given me the first real glimmer of hope I'd felt in months. Everything was about to be different. All through the night, Mr. Sterling's offer felt like a searchlight in a blizzard, a sign of rescue I was almost too overwhelmed to trust. But the storm was far from over, and a fresh avalanche hit the next day. I was on a conference call when my laptop chimed with a notification from a trade publication. My name was in the headline. Amelia, what in God's name is this? My business partner asked, his voice strained with shock. A sick feeling washed over me. He turned his monitor toward me so I could read the article. An anonymous source had planted a story that portrayed me as an unstable and manipulative opportunist who had trapped a major player in the Chicago real estate market. The blood in my veins ran cold. It invented a history of erratic business decisions and questioned my fitness to be a mother. It even included a candid, unflattering photo of me, a picture my supposed friend Chloe had taken when I was crying in a coffee shop a few weeks back. All the air left my lungs. This is a complete fabrication. I know it is, my partner said, his voice firm but his eyes full of concern. But a story like this, it's a character assassination. It's the first shot in a very public war. And that last accusation was crafted to hurt me far more than any attack on my professional life. You just need some time to focus on yourself, he had said, his voice completely devoid of its usual warmth. I could only nod, a scream building in my chest. Just for a little while, until this new development deal closes. Each word was like a physical blow. Our home, the place I thought was a safe haven for me and our unborn son, was now off limits to me because of his affair. When I walked out onto the Chicago street, the raw March wind howled off Lake Michigan, cutting straight through my wool coat. I couldn't feel my fingers. I was trembling, uncontrollably. The doorman at our Lakeshore Drive apartment, a sweet man named George, who'd known me for years, gave me a look I couldn't quite place. It wasn't just concern. It was deep, profound pity. I felt the fragile composure I had fought so hard to maintain simply crumble under his gaze. I was barely inside the waiting town car before the first sob escaped my lips. My breath came in sharp, painful bursts as my fingers dug into the leather seat. I wasn't crying over my marriage. I was crying because Liam and his architect girlfriend had just demolished my life to build their own. My phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. The text contained a single chilling sentence. "A blueprint is so easy to alter. I'd hate for yours to get torn up." C. A heavy, icy dread pooled in my stomach. Chloe. She wasn't satisfied with just taking my husband. She wanted to tear down everything I had ever built. As I stared at the screen, a second message appeared. It was from Liam. "Just wanted to see how you are. Are you okay?" The staggering hypocrisy of the question stole my breath. For the first time in my life, I felt utterly defenseless, unsure if I had the resilience to survive another assault. A gut-wrenching certainty took hold. This was a battle for my survival, and Chloe had just launched the first attack. I sat frozen in the back of the car, her words on my phone glowing like a poison dart. My hands were shaking too badly to type a reply, the magnificent Chicago skyline blurring into an abstract smear of light and shadow. I had no clue how much more I could take. My reputation was now in jeopardy. I was being explicitly threatened, and my unborn son was now a chess piece in a cruel game he knew nothing about. The phone vibrated again. "Liam, are you back at the condo? I'm heading over." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat was raw with unshed tears. About 15 minutes later, a gentle knock on the car window made me flinch. Liam stood there, his face arranged into a perfect picture of concerned husband. "Amelia, open the door." I rolled the window down just a crack. "How did you find me?" "You weren't answering. I called your office. They told me you left in a hurry." His voice was smooth as silk, but his eyes held a new and unsettling mix of impatience and a possessiveness that chilled me more than the wind outside. He crouched down to look at me. "Amelia, unlock the doors." My numb fingers finally did as he asked. He slipped into the seat beside me, the heavy car door closing with a quiet, solid click. He let the silence hang in the air, giving me a chance to compose myself before I finally found my voice. "They put me on administrative leave," I whispered. "Because of that article. Because of her." His jaw tightened. "Let me see it." I handed him my phone. Chloe's menacing text was still on the screen. His face was a complete blank. "She sent this to you." "It's more than that," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "She is trying to destroy my company. My partners are getting nervous." Liam rested his head back against the seat, exhaling slowly. "This isn't just a random jab. It's a strategy. She wants to make you feel so cornered that you'll just walk away." "Walk away from what?" I whispered. "From being an obstacle," he said, his voice chillingly quiet. A bitter taste flooded my mouth. "I am not trying to be an obstacle. That's irrelevant to her," he answered. "Your very existence is an inconvenience she needs to remove." The tears I thought I had no more of began to slide down my cheeks. How am I supposed to protect our son from that kind of hatred? Liam turned to face me, his voice low and laced with something that sounded like steel. "You protect him by refusing to let them break you, and you are not going to do this by yourself." I shook my head, the motion feeling like it took all my energy. "Liam, I can't let you fix this when you are the one who caused it." "This is not about who's to blame anymore," he cut in, his tone shifting entirely. This is about understanding what it's like to be targeted by people who think their power makes them untouchable. I just looked at him, confused. What are you talking about? He held my eyes for a long, tense moment, and then he revealed a side of himself I never knew was there. Because the very first high-rise I ever built was nearly bankrupted by a competitor with more political connections and fewer scruples than Chloe could ever imagine. I didn't just fight back. His voice hardened, losing all of its polished charm. I systematically bought out every one of his subcontractors until his entire project collapsed into a pile of debt. A completely new kind of shiver went down my spine, one that wasn't about fear. It was realization. Liam Porter wasn't just a successful developer, he was a shark. 2 nights later, I used every last bit of my energy to show up at the city's annual Architectural Awards Gala. I refused to let our son absorb the fear that had taken hold of me, the bone-deep weariness, the sense that our entire foundation was about to crumble. I put on a calm expression, placed a hand on my expanding stomach, and walked into the enormous ballroom at the Drake Hotel, into a world of dazzling lights and hollow pleasantries. Liam should be with me, a little voice in my head lamented. My heart ached. I know, sweetheart, I whispered to my unborn baby. He gave a gentle flutter, a soft little kick that felt like a secret communication between us. It's okay. I just wish he wanted to build a home as badly as he wants to build a skyline. I swallowed hard against the lump forming in my throat. Me too, my little one. The gala was a blur of forced smiles, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the overwhelming scent of thousands of white roses. For one brief, beautiful moment, I actually thought I might make it through the night unscathed. But peace has become an unaffordable luxury in my life. And that illusion was shattered the moment the main awards presentation began. In walked Liam Porter, the king of Chicago real estate. And he wasn't by himself. Chloe Devereaux, architecture's newest star, was on his arm. Her body poured into a stark white dress, her triumphant smile a silent threat aimed at me and everyone else in the room. A hush fell over the gilded ballroom. Donors started whispering into their phones. Society bloggers subtly raised their devices. When Arthur's eyes finally found me across the sea of auction paddles and floral centerpieces, his expression held no guilt, only cold calculation. He started moving in my direction, a shark that had just spotted its prey. My closest friend squeezed my hand, a quiet gesture of solidarity. It's okay, little one, I murmured to my belly. Mommy is fine. Arthur arrived, his voice a perfect performance of feigned worry. There you are. I was getting worried. His words were for the benefit of the watching crowd. I turned my head just enough that his kiss met only air. I did not return his smile. Why here, Arthur? I asked, my voice surprisingly firm despite the storm inside me. He acted baffled. What do you mean? It's the museum's most important fundraising night of the year. I mean the painting, I said, my voice dropping. The one by Moreau. Why did you have to buy it for her tonight? Sienna, sensing trouble, moved closer. Arthur, darling, the Guggenheim curator is waving you over. I kept my eyes locked on my husband. The painting for our son's nursery, the one we chose together. It will look beautiful in her apartment. Arthur's face became a rigid mask, the charming facade finally shattering as the weight of my words landed. Just deal with it. The entire grand ballroom seemed to lurch sideways. I couldn't get enough air. Before I could process anything, the auctioneer, trying to salvage the rapidly deteriorating atmosphere, cleared his throat into the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, our next item is a beautiful piece. Arthur leaned in, his whisper like a shard of ice in my ear. You did this to yourself. He straightened his tie, shot a look of pure fury at Sienna, and attempted to regain his public composure. But I was frozen, paralyzed by the horrifying truth that this was not just the revelation of an affair. This was my trial by social media. A hush fell over the tech world of New York as the first shocked whispers became a roar of notifications. 1,000 phone screens lit up, their glare shifting from the massive monitor behind the stage to my 8 months pregnant form and back again. My husband, Julian, the celebrated founder of Aura Innovations, was being publicly dismantled, and I was collateral damage. I forced a smile, a brittle, painful thing, as my world fractured in real time. I could practically feel the room's opinion shifting, the silent verdicts being rendered. The air grew thick with the stench of scandal. As the influencer on stage, Katerina, preened for the cameras, she tapped the smart bracelet on her wrist. The screen protector, a custom photo, became crystal clear for everyone to see. A candid shot of her and Julian. Our new Aura band is about authentic connection, the event host stammered, losing his place entirely, his eyes glued to the damning image on the Jumbotron. It showcases how a single vision can bring people closer, more intimately than ever before. A wave of gasps spread through the audience. The venture capitalists and tech journalists were no longer looking at the product. They were staring at Julian. My heart hammered against my ribs. Julian had gone ghost white, his face a tight mask of fury. He looked like he was about to vomit, but the product's tagline hung in the air above him, more damning than any accusation. Aura, know what's real. He couldn't spin this. He couldn't escape it. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I gripped the back of a chair, my knuckles turning white. Julian stared at Katerina's wrist, as if his gaze alone could shatter the device. I don't want a man who builds a digital empire. I want a man who can build a family with me. The thought was a silent scream in my mind. Julian finally hissed at his head of security, "Get her off the stage." But the reputational damage was done. The host muttered a frantic apology, and the live feed was cut. But the image from that bracelet was already a viral screenshot, seared into the memory of the entire industry. The lack of applause was deafening. Guests looked anywhere but at us. Their hushed commentary, a volley of poison, aimed at the man whose name was on the building. For the first time, I saw something in Julian truly crack. Not his composure, but his ego. Katerina rushed to his side, her own face pale with panic, speaking in a low, urgent tone. But Julian didn't seem to see her. His gaze was locked on me, desperate, furious, and utterly exposed. He looked like a master coder, watching his own perfect program get devoured by a virus he had created. And as I met his stare, holding onto that chair to keep from collapsing, I knew his flawless public persona wasn't the only thing that had been corrupted tonight. With that one image, he had erased every line of code that held our life together. The launch party devolved into a stunned, icy silence. Investors and partners made for the exits, their faces a mix of pity and disgust, refusing to meet my eyes. Tech bloggers were already live streaming their hot takes from the lobby. And Julian just stood there, his hands clenched into fists, his jaw set so tight it looked like it might break. Katerina tugged at his sleeve. "Julian, let's go. Everyone is filming this." But he was paralyzed. I retreated toward the catering area, where a woman from our early startup days held out a bottle of water for me. Sinking onto a crate, my hands instinctively went to my belly, a futile shield against the fallout. "I'm so sorry, little one," I pleaded silently. "I am so sorry." "Ilara," a raw voice said behind me, "we have to talk." I didn't have to turn around. Julian was there, his presence filling the small space. His face was a chaotic storm of emotions. Guilt, rage, terror, and a pathetic sliver of hope were twisted into a mask I didn't recognize anymore. I need a private word with my wife, Julian said through gritted teeth. I just shook my head. Not right now. Katerina pushed forward, her expression dripping with contempt. Oh, for God's sake, Alara, stop the performance. Just hear him out. Her words were sliced off by a voice that was quiet, deep, and held absolute power. She said no. Liam, our lead investor and a titan of Silicon Alley, had placed himself between us, a calm and unbreachable wall. The few remaining industry players who saw him knew him instantly. His name was whispered, and their glances toward Julian became even harder, colder. Liam spoke to me gently. Ilara, are you okay? I could only manage a nod, my voice trapped in a fog of shock. Julian turned on him, his anger reignited. This is a family matter. Liam took a deliberate step closer, his voice low and sharp as glass. Exposing your pregnant wife to this level of public stress is a significant health risk. That makes it my business. Someone has to prioritize her and the baby. It's obvious you're not. Julian's face flushed with a mixture of indignation and profound humiliation. She's my wife. Then it's about time you started treating her like it, Liam replied, his tone final. The enormous event space fell utterly still. Even the cleanup crew paused, their hands full of abandoned cocktail glasses. For a second, Julian looked like he might throw a punch. But then, all the fight just drained out of him. His shoulders slumped, his chin trembled, and his eyes darted around the room, unable to face the steady gaze of the man who had just demonstrated what true strength looked like. Katerina crossed her arms, her lip curled in disgust. Come on, Julian. You're being pathetic. But he was frozen in place. He just stood there, a hollowed-out version of the tech genius he was meant to be. And in that moment, I knew. Liam wasn't trying to be a white knight. He was simply filling the void where a good man should have been standing all along. As the last of the guests fled into the cool New York night, some shot me brief, sympathetic glances. Most just hurried away, desperate to share the gossip. Julian remained motionless in the center of the venue, as if the ghosts of those digital images had him pinned to the spot. Katerina had finally abandoned him, the sharp click of her heels echoing her rage as she stormed out alone. I stayed in the back, concentrating on taking slow, deep breaths, willing my racing heart to calm down. This much adrenaline wasn't good for a baby. Liam stayed nearby, his posture relaxed but watchful, a silent guardian standing between me and the smoldering wreckage of my marriage. At last, Julian moved, not toward the door, but toward me. He stopped several feet away and sank to his knees. The few remaining staff members froze what they were doing, sensing the weight of the moment. Ilara, Julian choked out, his voice broken. I saw the look on your face. I looked at him, feeling nothing but a deep, profound exhaustion. The entire world saw it. No, he whispered, shaking his head. I did that to you. The confession filled the silence. Julian swallowed hard, his voice shaking with a weakness I hadn't heard since we were two kids coding in a garage with nothing but a dream. I made an unforgivable error. I hurt you. I never, ever meant to hurt you like this. His face was a portrait of anguish. Then why, Julian? Why her? The question was barely audible, but it hit him like a physical blow. His entire body seemed to cave in on itself. Because I was arrogant, and I was careless, and I was a complete and utter fool. My breath hitched. In 15 years, the great Julian Vance had never, not once, admitted to being a fool. Humiliated by the audience, the venue manager tried to discreetly wave his crew away. But Julian was oblivious. He stood in the doorway of my cramped new rental, the Chicago air thick with unspoken apologies. I know nothing I say can fix this, Marcus whispered, his voice hoarse. But I have to try to build a bridge back to you, if there's any chance you'll let me. Our daughter, Maya, stared at him with the clear, searching eyes of a 6-year-old trying to process a monumental adult failure. Are you sorry you made Mommy cry? She asked, her voice small. Yes, Marcus choked out, his famous composure finally cracking. More than you'll ever understand. A heavy, painful quiet settled over the room. Then Maya uttered a phrase that felt like a fault line, cracking open the floor between us. I forgive you, Daddy, but I want to live here with Mommy. Marcus pressed his eyes shut, the agony on his face absolute. From the kitchen counter, a notification pinged on the family tablet he'd left behind. A headline from a major food blog glowed on the screen. Exclusive, the secret ingredient in Chef Thorne's life. He seemed to shrink in the doorway. The layers of his celebrity charm and confidence peeled away, leaving him looking smaller and utterly lost. He gave me one final glance, his eyes begging for something I couldn't give. But the conversation was over. Forgiveness was for my own peace of mind, not for his redemption. As he turned and walked down the path, completely alone, a strange sense of calm washed over me. The immense influence he once had over my life was gone, shattered by a blogger's ambition and the undeniable truth I'd found in a hidden photo album. And for the first time in years, I could actually see the new beginning that was waiting for me. After the last of the movers had finally driven away, I stepped onto the small back porch and into the crisp autumn air. I felt exhausted and exposed, but also profoundly lucid, as if a long illness had finally passed. I rested my forehead against a cool wooden post, breathing in the scent of damp earth, and brought my hand to my lips, kissing the pale indent where my wedding band had been. She's going to be a fighter, a steady voice said from the side. I turned my head. Ethan was standing by the railing, the distant glow of the Chicago skyline behind him, his quiet presence the only solid thing in my shifting world. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the sliding door. She shouldn't have to be, I whispered, my hand resting on my stomach. No, he said gently, but she will be, because you're her mother. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, a genuine warmth spread through my ribs. I didn't feel like a fool. I didn't feel shattered. I didn't feel like a victim at all. I just felt still. Maybe confronting Marcus wasn't a triumph. Maybe it wasn't the final scene of the drama. But the truth, finally dragged into the light, had relieved me of an unbearable burden, a secret I had been forced to nurture all by myself. What am I even supposed to do now? I asked the twilight. Ethan came to stand beside me. Now you stop trying to fix the old landscape, and you start designing your own. A brittle, weary laugh escaped me. That sounds about 1,000 times more difficult. Then you let the people who believe in you lend a hand, he replied, his tone kind. Let me get you a ride service. I glanced up into his eyes and saw nothing but sincere concern and deep respect. There wasn't an ounce of pity. He wasn't a hero swooping in to save me. He was just a fundamentally good person who hadn't buckled when my whole life did. The community board meeting, I said, recalling where we'd first met. A faint smile appeared on Ethan's face. I'm very glad I showed up that night. Just say the word, and you're the lead designer. I agree. The words didn't come from a place of panic or need, but from a conscious decision to build a life where my children and I would be secure, respected, and truly cherished. Ethan let out a long, slow exhale, one he seemed to have been holding for some time. That's fantastic. There is, however, one last detail. A nervous flutter started in my stomach. He reached into his satchel and slid, not a contract, but a huge roll of site plans across the cafe table. They felt substantial in my hands, filled with new potential. Those are for the new therapeutic garden at the Children's Hospital, he explained, his eyes shining with purpose. It's a completely blank canvas. The entire vision will be yours. You've more than earned the chance to grow something beautiful from the ground up. Tears began to well in my eyes. Ethan. He reached over and, with his thumb, gently brushed a tear from my cheek. The gesture was simple, incredibly kind, and said everything. You don't have to replant your whole life in one afternoon, he said softly, but when you're ready, I would be honored to help you draw the plans. A deep current of peace moved through me. Not fear, not panic, but a profound and grounding calm. This was a real start. All I could manage was a nod, and for the first time in forever, the future didn't feel like a sheer cliff face to be climbed. It felt like an open, sunlit field, waiting to be planted. As Ethan walked me to the street corner, the early morning sun warming my face, I knew this wasn't just a new chapter. This was the life I was finally choosing to design myself. And that is the place where this particular narrative finds its resolution. The final page is turned. If you have stayed with us, tracing this path from its difficult beginnings to its hopeful new dawn, it is probably because some element of this journey resonated with you. Perhaps you saw a reflection of your own strength in Clara's quiet resilience. Maybe you recognize the value of Ethan's steady, respectful support. Or perhaps you were simply reminded that real healing isn't about winning, but about choosing to honor your own worth, day after day. You know, the great Stoic philosophers believed that we control our responses, not the events that happen to us. This is the very principle we have just seen unfold. Their pain did not destroy them. The betrayals they faced were not allowed to define their future. They made a conscious choice to find their balance on more solid ground. As the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The mind adapts and converts to its own purposes the obstacle to our acting." If this story has offered you anything, let it be this fundamental truth. You are worthy of peace. You have a right to be treated with dignity, and you have a right to a future that is founded on honesty, not on secrets. If this story provided even a small piece of encouragement or a moment of insight, please think about showing your support by liking this video, sharing it with someone else who may be navigating their own difficult path, and subscribing to continue these conversations with our community. Because your own story is important, and your most beautiful chapters are still ahead. Just a quick note for everyone with us today, this story is a piece of fiction written entirely for the purpose of exploring human, emotional landscapes and encouraging self-reflection. Any resemblance to actual people or real-life situations is purely coincidental. Our intention is to explore themes of resilience, inner strength, and the difficult choices we all face, not to portray the private lives of any specific individuals. We create these stories to offer a measure of comfort, a spark of hope, and a quiet moment to reflect on our own journeys with compassion and kindness. Thank you for listening with such an open heart and for being such a wonderful part of this community.